Welcome to TVI Tips from Amanda. In this video, we're going to be talking about alphabetic word signs, and I left the little squigglies under the word signs because that's a term that's unique to Braille, and I wanted to kind of highlight that term. In the past, you might have heard these called alphabetic contractions, and let's talk a little bit about the history of Braille and the different types of Braille codes. I had avoided this particular group of contractions for a while because these videos aren't intended to be a curriculum. They're not intended to tell you everything that you need to know about Braille. You're going to have to take a class. You're going to have to be trained by a TVI in person. You're going to have to delve into these manuals for learning or some other way to learn the Braille. These videos are just tips to kind of help you along your journey and to make it a little bit more relatable or relevant to you. So let's just talk a little bit about the different types of Braille codes. In the past, an English learner in the United States would learn a Braille code called EBAE, or English Braille American Edition. Now, this code was great. A lot of people loved it. But if a student from the U.S. or a professional from the U.S. who was a Braille reader went to a different English-speaking country and tried to access Braille, they would run into some struggles because pretty much everywhere else on the planet except for the United States uses a code called UEB, or Unified English Braille. So someone from Canada could go to the UK and use the same Braille. They're using the same exact Braille. So that sort of transfer of Braille code wasn't possible with EBAE, and there were also some kind of issues with the code itself in the US. So as a group of professionals, they decided to change to just using UEB in the United States, and the transition should mostly be complete, but it's been going on for the last couple years, even though we've known it's been going on for several. And there are a lot of camps in the Braille world who think that EBAE is great or UEB is great, and there's a lot of disagreement about which code was more robust and better, but we're not going to talk about that here and now. What we have to do is know that some materials that you'll encounter as a paraprofessional, as a person who's going to be a TVI, as a parent, as a Braille reader, some of them are going to be in EBAE. If you have old textbooks or old library books, those are probably going to be in EBAE. So it's good to be familiar with those differences. There are a lot of videos, I'm sure, out there on the differences between EBAE and UEB. So you have to be familiar with that. But everything else now should be in UEB, hopefully. There are still people who are a little behind the curve in getting their stuff out in UEB. Then you also have math code. And Nemeth is the type of code that most people have used, not just in the United States, but in other countries as well. And you can use UEB for literature and then include Nemeth within that UEB context. Or you can use the UEB code with technical symbols done inside. And so again, there's another whole layer of controversy about what code should be used for math. Should you be using Nemeth? Should you be using UEB technical? And we're not going to delve into that controversy today either. Just know that you also have, in addition to two types of language arts or literature, literary Braille, two different types of math Braille, you also have a code unique to music, a code unique to computer Braille, and then you have other special symbols and rules that go along with using other languages like the Enye in Spanish. So I bring up that history because it's important to know that in the past, we in EBAE, we called contractions and groups of contractions different things. So when I'm referencing groups of contractions in these videos, I will give you the UEB term, and then I'll probably also give you what we used to call it back in the day, or like 3 years ago. Okay. Another thing I want to talk about a little bit here is the rules of UEB. I reference them, and I'm going to be referencing them a lot in my videos, and I want you to know where I'm coming from. So I use the Rules of Unified English Braille. It's the second edition, published in 2013, edited by Christine Simpson and published by ICEB, or the International Council on English Braille. And in the comment section or in the description for this video, I'll post a link to that, because like I said, this is not, these videos are not curricular or a curriculum. They're just meant for you to get tips and hints and tricks and just have that reinforcement of what you're learning in your Braille journey. So I'm going to talk about the rules, but I'm not going to give you every single example about when you should be using them. So just know that you should always reference the rules for the code in addition to any tips you get from my videos. Moving on, we have alphabetic word signs. Almost every letter of the alphabet has a contraction when it's standing alone, or when it has a space before and then the letter and then a space after, or if it's touching some punctuation, like quotations, periods, commas, that sort of thing. But what you need to know is that not every letter has a contraction, because I by itself is I, the word I. The letter A by itself is the word A. The letter O by itself could sometimes be used as a word. O is written with just an O sometimes. So those three do not have contractions to go along with them. Similarly, the words that we have don't always make sense, because Braille code was developed a long time ago, and the primary purpose for the Braille transcription was to take things from the Bible. And so we have words like quite and rather that you don't use quite so much, but they are alphabetic word signs. As a group, they have decided to keep them even though we don't use them very much. So some of them are going to be easier for you to learn than others. We'll talk a little bit more about some tips later, but we have but, can, do, every, from, go, have, just, knowledge, like, more, not, people, quite, rather, so, that, us, very, it, you, as, will. Every alphabetic word sign except for the X by itself, which is it, and Z by itself, which is as, starts with the same letter as the letter that's standing alone. X by itself is it, and Z is as. I don't really have a trick to remember it, but for as, you have that kind of that hard S sound, that Z at the end of as. So that's how I remembered as when I was learning the Braille code. I talked a little bit before about standing alone. What that can mean is that there is a space before that Braille cell and then a space after. For example, you're not going to use, let's go back up. So E by itself is every, and in the word every day, it's a compound word with every, no space in the word day. When you're writing every day in Braille, you don't write E for every and then the day, because otherwise you'd be writing E-D-A-Y, which is not the word every day. It's just a day, a day. So those standalone words, these alphabetic word signs, have to have some rules that make sense for when it can be that contraction or when it's just a letter. So they can touch certain punctuation marks or symbols like periods, exclamation marks, question marks, commas, quotations, dashes. If you go back and reference the rules, then you'll have some more examples of what you can and can't use those standalone contractions with when they're touching those sorts of things. And you can use them in those verbal or print contractions like you'll, you'd have Y apostrophe LL for you'll, and for can't, you would have a C apostrophe T, so they can touch apostrophes, but not every apostrophe. I really, really want to encourage you to go back to that rule book and learn about what it means to stand alone. And the really cool thing is the index for the rules is very extensive, and you can literally just Control F for find, type in stand alone, and it will bring you to the standalone rules. And if you touch it on the index, it will take you exactly to that page. So we can use these alphabet contractions in a lot of situations, but I just want to point out really importantly that you won't use it for things where the letters are used like as an abbreviation where it doesn't sound the same. So when you're talking about the United States or the US, when you have the capital U and the capital S, we don't say us, we say US. So you would not use the us contraction or the U by itself, capital U, or capital U for us. Same thing with IT department. It's not the it department, so you would not use the X for it in IT department. You would just spell that one out. So we talk a lot about how can we practice and learn this Braille. The alphabet word signs, some of them you're going to learn really fast because you use them all the time. But some of them you're not going to use. Knowledge. K by itself is knowledge. When do we really use that terminology except for as a teacher writing learning objectives or something like that? So I recommend making some flashcards. I think that it's really good to practice Braille several times a day for just little chunks. Keep it fresh. Keep it going throughout your day. You can sing songs to learn some of them. When I have a Braille learner who is working on the alphabetic word signs, we might practice marching from their classroom to the Braille room and just so B by itself is but, C by itself is can, or I might say B by itself is and wait for my student to say but. And we don't always go in order, we mix them up too because it's important to know them spontaneously without having to go B, C, D all the way down the alphabet. It can be easy to memorize them in order by building, just starting at the B by itself is but, C by itself is can, but then make sure you mix it up because, like I said, knowing things just in that order isn't going to help you generalize those skills. And then once you've gotten some of them down, or maybe you're looking at the list of all the contractions, try making some sentences using as many alphabetic word signs as you can. It's one of my favorite things to do as a TVI when I want to show the value of learning the alphabetic word signs to my students who've been using uncontracted Braille and now they're going to start using contracted Braille. It can be difficult to get that buy-in because you have to think about language in a different way that when you're using the Braille code and you're using these contractions. And sometimes people may think that the difficulty of learning the contractions doesn't outweigh the ease of just going letter by letter. But if you can come up with a sentence and make it shorter and help that person see how quickly they can read the Braille if they know these contractions, it's going to be better. So you might write a sentence or a question, can you do it? Question mark. You have 4 contractions in there, the can, the you, the do, and the it. And then the response to that question might be, you can go for it. And we talked about 4 in the video about strong contractions. So really that 5-word sentence has a capital sign, 5 Braille cells, 5 contractions, and then an exclamation point maybe, which is going to be a lot shorter when you compare that to spelling it out letter by letter. So one of my favorite things to do is try to make sentences using as many alphabetic word signs as I can, just to kind of keep them fresh in my students' head, give them some confidence when they're starting to read, and then, start incorporating those alphabetic word signs into sentences with other words that maybe don't have some contractions. So I'm going to post a link to the rules for Unified English Braille. I'm going to post a link to the Braille Transcriptionist Manual that you can get from the NFB that has a lot more practice. And then I'm going to post a link to UEB Online. That's another place that you can learn the Braille code for free. And there are positives and negatives to referencing each of these 3 resources, but I think it's important to, as you're learning Braille, pull from as many things as you can. And the Braille Transcriptionist Manual that you can access at NFB or the Library of Congress, those things have tons and tons and tons of practice. So it's another great place to go and practice some Braille. I hope that this little history of Braille and then the alphabetic word signs kind of helps you get going on that part of your Braille journey.